In the last presentation, I was asked a question about the day of God's visitation and what it referred to. So I want to direct us to two Bible passages. Luke chapter 19, verse 44. Luke chapter 19, verse 44. Pick up from verse 43. For the day shall come upon thee, that thine enemy shall cast a trench about thee, and compass thee round, and keep thee in on every side. This is AD 70. And shall lay thee even with the ground, and thy children within thee, and they shall not leave in thee one stone upon another, the destruction of the city and the temple, because of this reason, thou knewest not the time of thy visitation. So in Luke 19:44, the day of visitation that's being spoken of there is the time period when Christ was here on earth. We could pick up from 27 to 34. You may even go slightly beyond that, but I would think, in my understanding, that this is 27 to 34. The 70th week of Daniel chapter 9 is the time period of the visitation of God's people. And because of the rejection of Christ during that time of visitation, they're going to be punished in AD 70. So we know that, just a simple reading of this passage, that the day of God's visitation is the time where he's going to come and investigate you, or a time of, I don't want to call it preparation, but a time of investigation. The day of the Lord, maybe I will say preparation because I don't want to give the wrong connotation of it. We could call it the day of the Lord's preparation, but it's not really a time to prepare in the sense that we might normally think that it is, but it's to exhibit what character we have before judgment actually occurs. And if you fail the test, then destruction is in these verses. And if you pass the test, you'll escape. So if you're a disciple in that period, in AD 66, you would have escaped punishment because you accepted the day of the Lord's visitation. And if you didn't, you would have remained in Jerusalem in AD 70 and been destroyed. The other one that was quoted was 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 12. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 12. Having your conversation honest among the Gentiles, that whereas they speak against you as evildoers, they may by your good works, which they shall behold, glorify God in the day of visitation. So this visitation that's being spoken of here is a visitation of the vengeance of God, or the day of God's wrath, if I can express it that way. So there are two visitations, one of wrath and one of investigation. But they're both essentially the day of visitation if we think about it in the terms of the work of the third angel. So there's a visitation here and there's a visitation here. It's all one visitation, but one of it is in the work or the time period of investigation, and one is the time period of execution. There are a number of different Bible passages that deal with that. And let me just see if I can pick up another one. Jeremiah 51:18. Jeremiah 51:18. They are vanity, the work of errors. In the time of their visitation they shall perish or be killed. Another one is Jeremiah 50, verse 27. Slay all her bullocks, let them go down to the slaughter. Woe unto them, for their day is come, the time of their visitation. That's Jeremiah 50:27. I just read Jeremiah 51:18. Previous to that was Luke 19:44 and 1 Peter 2:12. So the day of visitation is encompassing this history between the selection and the sealing. All of that is the day of visitation, which is the day of judgment, but it's in two steps. There's an executive judgment, there's an investigative judgment. I'll give you two Spirit Prophecy quotes that connect this together. And the first one is taken from Testimonies to the Church, Volume 5, 5T 209, paragraph 2. 5T 209, paragraph 2. The crisis is fast approaching. The rapidly swelling figures show that the time for God's visitation has about come. Although loath to punish, nevertheless he will punish, and that speedily. Those who walk in the light will see signs of the approaching peril, but they are not to sit quiet, unconcerned expectancy of it. So they're not to sit in quiet, unconcerned expectancy of the ruin, comforting themselves with the belief that God will shelter his people in the day of visitation. Far from it. They should realize that it is their duty to labor diligently to save others, looking with strong faith to God for help. The effectual fervent prayer of a righteous man availeth much. So this day of visitation is coming, and we're not supposed to sit back just waiting for it to come. We're supposed to warn people before the day. She calls it the day of crisis. She calls it the day where God is going to punish, and she calls it peril. It's a time of peril, punishment, and crisis. All of these are indicating the day of the Lord's vengeance. I'll give you one more. This is Review and Herald, December 2nd, 1875, paragraph 11. RH, December 2, 1875, paragraph 11. You made the remark, my parents were godly and they kept Sunday and will be saved. If I keep the day which they kept, why will not I be as safe as they? Someone's asking her that question. Your relatives and friends, this is her answer. Your relatives and friends may have lived up to the light they had. They are not accountable for the light which shines in your day, which they did not have. If you have greater light than your fathers, and you live up to that light as faithfully as your fathers did to the light which shone upon them, you will be saved by obeying as they will be saved by obedience to the light which the Lord permitted to shine upon them. And this is the condemnation, the light is come into the world, and men love darkness rather than light, because their deeds were evil. If I had not come and spoken unto them, had they not had sin, they had not sinned, if I hadn't have done that. But now they have no cloak for their sin. We are responsible for the light which shines upon our path. This is our day of visitation and privileges, when the light is shining upon us. God is setting before us solemn truth. Will we accept it? Reject will we accept it? Reject not present light, and do not lightly esteem God's gracious opportunities. So the day of God's visitation is the time where God's people have this new light, and we're supposed to walk in this new light, or the development of it. So again, you have the day of God's visitation here, where there's this light that's coming, and there's this day of visitation here where God's going to execute or punish, depending, or save you, hide you in the day of the Lord's visitation, depending on your response to what happened. So hopefully that answered that issue. I know we've all read, or I assume we've all read, Patriarchs and Prophets, Prophets and Kings, and many of the stories that are associated with those books. But I want us to read some passages from that history, but we're not going to read it from Prophets and Kings. we're going to read it from another series of articles. These are a series of Review and Herald articles which were written in 1907, 1908. And I think it's a 14 series article. It's quite extensive. And this was the precursor to the material that's in Prophets and Kings. So the material is very, very similar. And the reason why I want us to speak about or read some of these things, it's quite difficult to collect all of these thoughts together without reading them. And if I read them, it comes quite problematic because it takes a long time to read them. So it's not that easy for me to try and describe what I want to say, but I try and give a summary of what I want to say and then read the passages to show what's being demonstrated there.
Were the articles under a particular title? Yeah, I got that.
Yeah, I think it's called, I'll give you references as we go through.
Okay.
I don't know when they begin. Let me check if they're all titled. Yeah, I think they're all under the same title called The Return of the Exiles. Return of the Exiles. It begins in March 14th, 1907. March 14th, 1907. The title is The Return of the Exiles, number 1. And it goes all the way to 1908. And obviously the title tells you what it's going to be about. Before we read that, I just want to tidy up some loose ends here. When we think about Revelation chapter 10, in connection to Millerite history, this is Revelation 10, 1798 to 1844. It's the story of 7 thunders. And we've marked that there's this way marked there. This is Revelation 10. And I've tried to mark it this way to show that Millerite history is the history of the first angel's message. There's the advancing light of the first angel, and then it begins to do its work, a glorious manifestation of the power of God. And all of this is going to be repeated in our history here from 1989 to the Sunday law, where we're going to have 7 thunders, a waymark, and then there's the advancing light of the third angel, and then what we might call its empowerment. And all of this is the history of the third angel. So when we think about the Lord placing one foot upon the land and one foot on the sea in this history, what I wanted us to see is not just the issue that it's a message of worldwide extent, and it is, and we see that being marked here at this point, which is 1840. And the message becomes one of worldwide extent at 9/11. But it's a story about how God is going to crush or destroy this satanic empire. Previous to this, you have this woman sitting on the European nations, and she transfers over to the United States. And when she does so, the United States becomes her stooge, and the Lord is going to begin to deal with the United States. He begins to do it here when there's a call or a separation from the Protestant churches by the Millerites, eventually forming Adventism. But it's going to come to its complete fulfillment, or as Ellen White would say, the perfect fulfillment, here in our history. So in this history, we're going to see the same dynamics being portrayed here, and what we're understanding is, I think most of us already know this, but just wanted to tidy this up so that we're clear about what is happening. The history here of this beast in the 1260, which we spoke about, this history here is going to be addressed or dealt with over here in the Sunday law time period. So this 1260 has paralleled this history here. So when Christ begins to deal with this here, this beast, he's going to now deal with the same beast in this history, but when it's the beast here, we'll put an R here. What does that R represent? Resurrection. So that resurrected beast, we don't normally use, we call it beast R. What do we normally call it? We normally call it the image of the beast. The word image means a copy or a mannequin. So this is a copy of the beast. What beast is it copying? This one here. It's a copy of this beast. Yeah? So someone mentioned about Revelation 17 before, the 8th head. It says the 8th is of the 7. It's not of all the 7. Could it be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7? There's 7 heads. Could it be a copy of the history of the 6th? Where it says it's one of the 7. The 8th is one of the 7. Why couldn't it have been the 6th? Because it's dead. Because at least for that reason, it's dead. And if you go back into the history, it's a woman riding a beast, which is whoredom, which is the kings of the earth. So you have two separate entities, the church in connection with a government or a state. If you go back to all of these previous histories, you'll see that that never ever occurred. So it couldn't have been the first, or the second, or the third, or the fourth. Because in each of those powers, you never had a separate, unique church that was controlling the government. And it certainly couldn't have been the 7th, because the 7th is this history itself. Because that's number 7. So when it says it's of the 7, this number 8, which I'll put here, when it says it's of the 7, the only one it could be is this one here, the 5th, which is this history here. So when the 7th head rises here, this power that's in control way back from 1798 all the way to the Sunday law, which country is this? This is the 6th head, the United States, or we could call it Medo-Persia. Yeah? Medo-Persia. What comes after Medo-Persia? Greece. Greece does what? Daniel 2:39. Rules the world. So one world government. So this is number 7, which is Greece, which is the United Nations. We'll just call it the United Nations in a simple way. And this was the United States. I haven't explained the transition, how you get from one kingdom to another, except to note that it has to be progressive. So what we're identifying when we tie up all of these loose ends is that we spent a lot of time looking at the historical application of what's going on, but at the end of the world, God is going to address or deal with the United Nations. And we're almost here at the end of the world, and the United Nations isn't going to change its power base, where it's located. And where is the United Nations located? Okay, so one of its power bases is in the United States, in New York, and the other one is? It's in Europe, in the Netherlands, in The Hague. This is the judicial arm of the United Nations. What do they call it? I'll just call it the judicial arm of the United Nations. The World Court. I was going to say the World Court, but I don't know if that's the official term for it. We'll call it the World Court. So you can see that this idea about the United States and Europe isn't just some kind of random thought or random idea. It's not some kind of random thought or idea that the headquarters of the United Nations is based in Europe as much as it's based in the United States. It's both of those centres that are going to be dealt with. So that's how we would understand Revelation chapter 10 in an end-time application. What we haven't discussed is how the United States turns from a sheep into a dragon. We know it's going to be when the separation of church and state begins to really take effect, and in our message we understand that it's already begun to happen. In fact, it's happened a long time ago. For sure you could pick it up in 1989. For definite you could pick it up at 9/11, and we're in 2017 now, and so much has happened since those two waymarks. You know, I don't know how anybody could reasonably suggest that that alliance isn't fully sealed and settled in. However, there are people, again, in our movement who are now voicing concerns and saying, Revelation 18 isn't even being fulfilled yet. It's a future event. Are there any questions on this before I move on to this part that I wanted to address? I hope that I've tidied up the loose end that I'd left about how we're going to get Revelation 10 from Millerite history into our own history, and how we can use the beasts of these ancient kingdoms, Medo Persia and Greece, into end-time prophecy, and how we then we get to a stage where we see that the presidents of the United States from 1989 are typifying, or were typified by the kings or the rulers of the Medo-Persian Empire, and how that transition is going to go from Medo-Persia to Greece. My brother.
That's the fifth trumpet, right?
When this number 5 here? Not the fifth trumpet, no.
Church.
This is the fifth head of Revelation 17. There's a beast with 7 heads and 10 horns, and it's the fifth one of those.
The reason I was asking is because it seems like the fifth church kind of corresponds with that.
The fifth church is Sardis, if that's what you meant. Because this is the fourth church. I think we did this already. I had a number 4 here, if you remember. This is Thyatira, the fourth church. I put fourth church. We could go to, we won't turn there, but I think it's Revelation 2:17 to 2:20, which talks about Jezebel. Someone just said Jezebel. So her name, she's got 2 names, Jezebel and Babylon, Mystery Babylon. She has 2 names. This fourth church here, Thyatira, is a typification of this history here. So this becomes also the fourth church, if that's what you were referring to. When you were trying to line up this history with this one, it's to do with the churches, but it's number 4. So either people don't know what I've been speaking about, or you're already happy and I did a good job, because there aren't that many questions. I'm going to take all of this out, or shall I leave it for a bit? I'll leave it for a bit because I've got a bit of reading to do. So this is the return of the exiles. And I just want to quickly tie in the 7 thunders that we've been speaking about here. And again, you've probably seen a number of presentations done on this and how we tie these histories together. Here's 1798, 1844, and there's 1, 2, 3 messages, 7 thunders. This is the 2300-day prophecy, and it ends in 1844, and it begins in the year 457 BC. Everybody's familiar with that? This is the decree of Artaxerxes. You could go to Ezra chapter 7 and Ezra chapter 6 to identify that. And here's the third of 3 decrees. The first decree being Cyrus. Issuing a decree in 536. So here we've got Cyrus, Darius, and Artaxerxes. We could read Ezra chapter 6 verse 14, which would actually list those 3 decrees. Talks about under the decree of Cyrus, Darius, and Artaxerxes, something happens. And I'm sure you're all aware that what this history here is marking is the restoration of the temple. Yeah, are we all familiar with that's what the Persian kings do? They release God's people out of Babylon and they're going to restore them. It's this history here that we've just got down here. We've got 536, the same history. So before 536, God's people were in captivity in Babylon for 70 years. And before 1798, God's people were in captivity in Babylon for 1260 years. So you can see the connection. This is the time of the end, making this the time of the end. There's many things that we can do when we begin to connect these histories together. This is 7 thunders. I'm sure you're probably all aware that there are not just 3 Persian kings here. There are actually 7 Persian kings. 7 Persian kings are Cyrus, Cambyses, Pulsmodus, Darius, Xerxes, Artabanus, and Artaxerxes. And currently in our movement, who's the hot topic king? Who's the one we're focusing on so much in this history? The 4th, Darius. Is it Darius that we focus on a lot now? Artaxerxes we focus a lot on? Are we all guessing? And Xerxes is which king in the Bible? This is the Ahasuerus. The story of Esther. Yeah? So, we're not going to read the passages, but if we were to go to Daniel 11 verses 1 to 3, the king who's ruling, I've got 5 kings here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The 5th king is this one here, Xerxes. But in Daniel 11 verse 1, the king who's actually ruling, his name is Cyrus. You get that from Daniel 10 verse 1. So it's Cyrus who's ruling here. Then Gabriel tells Daniel that after you, 3 kings will rule. 1, 2, 3 kings will rule. And then he says, the 4th shall be far richer than them all. So this would be the 4th king here. But it's the 5th in the series of the Persian Empire. So that's Xerxes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we're okay with that? And then we're going to line up this because this here is the time of the end, 536, lining up with the time of the end here in 1798. So we've done that. But what have we done with the time of the end? We've lined it up with our history, haven't we? And what year would this be? 1989, time of the end. Are we all okay with that? This is the history of sheep. This is the history of sheep. Got it down here. Yep. So all we would do then is we'd say, well, we've got Cyrus with all the kings ending up with Xerxes. Then what we'd have to do is see who these were typifying, because this is the time of the end, 1989. We just need to find out who the president of the glorious land was in that history, and we know who that is. It's Bush, Clinton, Bush, Obama, and now your latest president, President Donald Trump. Yeah? So this is the hot topic when we think about what we're discussing in our movement. Does all that make sense? Okay. So when we think about these seven thunders, obviously if we've got seven thunders here and here, we'd have seven thunders in this history. Which would mean what? Would you be expecting seven presidents if you had seven Persian kings? Perhaps so.
Yeah.
Perhaps no. Yeah? So we're expecting seven presidents. We've got five. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And not so much through the history of seven Persian kings, but through other lines of prophecy, what we've begun to understand is if this was number 5, and then we were going to look for number 6 and number 7, we're not looking now for 2 more presidents. What we're beginning to see is this. That what's going to happen is we're at the final president, but the final president is going to change his relationship as he interacts with his people, with his government. And so we're going to see a transition from the 5th to the 6th to the 7th president, as we did see from the 5th to 6th to the 7th Persian kings. And what we'll be looking for are the characteristics of these Persian kings as we go through time to see what are the characteristics that the president here, and maybe I shouldn't just call it the presidency. What do you call the group of men that surround the president? The administration? Is that the phrase that you use? The cabinet or the administration? Yeah, the cabinet? Okay, so I'll call it the cabinet or the administration. So the administration, which is a small group of men, not a group of small men, a small group of men, I didn't say that again, how they're going to change and morph themselves, and the way they relate to the United States, the country at large, is going to change. So you're going to go from a Republican nation to a theocratic nation, or probably I might call it a dictatorship, and then finally eventually coming to this period here where it's the 7th, where now we're in the history here, because the 7s line up, and the United States has now turned from a sheep to a dragon. It's now finally become a dragon. It transitions in this history here from a lamb, and it transforms into a dragon. Remember this issue of progression. By the time it gets fully to here, it's now fully a dragon. So this history here is the transition from sheep to dragon. By here it's fully a dragon, and now the United States is ruling the world supremely. It's going to take a lot to get from here, 2017, to here, the National Sunday Law. And what's so tragic about all of this, if we were thinking of a scale of 1, I call it 0, to 100% of information about how you get from here to here, this movement, I don't know what percentage you'd want to give it, but I'd suggest we're about, at least here, 80% plus on our understanding, detailed understanding of how to get from this state to this state. So this is us. And I know people didn't like this. This is them. And I would suggest that them, the Adventist Church, are way back here at 0%. They're clueless, literally clueless, of understanding how to get from here to here. In fact, if you want to get people who actually have some idea, go into YouTube and watch some of the wacky, the literally wacky ideas that evangelical Christians are coming up with to identify that the administration or the cabinet of your present administration is going to send this world into perdition. Because even they have an idea about this. They might be here at sort of like 5%, even though it's just little foolishness. But at least they're having a stab at it. At least they're having a go, which is far better than what our church is doing, which is like ostrich style, burying our heads in the sand and saying, someday something's going to happen, but it's certainly not this day, because everything's going good. So, sorry? So, the reason why the relationship between the 2300 days as it relates to Millerite history and the history of the Persian kings is extremely important for us to understand. And I've just sort of given a brief overview of why that is. There's many things we could do with this. The 2300 days, it begins with the restoration of the temple and it ends with Daniel 8:14, it ends with a cleansing of the, which is a restoration. So the 2300 days is a story of restoration. Yeah? Which is in contrast to something else. I'm going to say, not use the word restore, but I'm going to use the word gather. So the 2300 days is a prophecy of gathering in relationship or contrast to scattering. And the scattering is the 2520. And the relationship between the 2520 and the 2300 days is what number? 220. So we have the 2520, we have the 2300 days. They both terminate in 1844. This one is 457 and this one is 677. Hopefully we know that. And this time period here is 220 years. And 220 is a symbol of restoration. So there's many things that we can understand by using these 7 thunders in the way that I've just described. But the one I was looking at here was the connecting of 7 Persian kings with the Millerite history in our own history, connecting these 3 time of the ends. If you had 70 years captivity here and 1260 years captivity here, what are you expecting here? You have to be expecting captivity. This captivity here of the 1260 is what? It's the second half of the 2520. So this is the 2520. And we're going to run out of time, so I'm just going to mention this. The 2520 now fits in this history here. I think probably most of you have seen presentations done on this. So we put the 2520 here, 1989. But we have a much more sophisticated argument about that, don't we? Because we say it's not 2,520, it's what? 126. So hopefully you've seen the presentations that address that issue. It's 126. It's not 126 as some kind of bogus symbol, it's 126 years. If you clock back 126 years, it takes you to the year 1863. In the year 1863 is 19 years after the year 1844, which is 46 years after the year 1798. And we could take that story all the way back, because we had 677, and we'd go back how many years from here? 65 years back here, and we'd get to the year 742. So all I want to say is, if you're not familiar with this presentation or this idea, way back here, Isaiah chapter 7, you have a continuous line of prophecy that takes you from this date all the way to the time of the end here, without a break. It's a continuous stream of prophecy that takes you all the way from here to the end, the time of the end here in 1989, which is why I'm saying that in this movement we have a really clear understanding of what end time prophecy is all about. Sorry? Someone said something. I missed what they said.
The text of Isaiah is the text in Isaiah.
The text.
Yeah.
Yeah, if we went to Isaiah chapter 7 verse 8, that's where this story would begin. So I want to take that out. So I want to come and deal with this history here. We want to address these two kings. This is Xerxes and this is Darius. Darius is here, is the fourth Persian king in this dynasty. And we know that the temple is going to begin to be restored here in his administration or his reign. So all of that was just a preamble to locate us between two Persian kings. So I'm okay to rub some of this off. I'll rub this off. I'll leave this bit on the board. So we're here between Darius and Xerxes. Now, when we start thinking about these seven thunders in our own history, we can begin to line up these kings with events that are occurring in our own history. So that's what we want to try and do quite really briefly in a simple way. I'm not going to prove most of this, but let me do it this way. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. If you go to the notes for the prophecy school that we've just had in Arkansas and you download the notes, this picture and some of this information is already in your notes there. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. These are the seven Persian kings. Cyrus, Darius, Artaxerxes, and here is Xerxes. And we can line these histories up with our own history. So where would we begin here? 1989. I'll put 1992. I'll put 91 to 92. 1996. 9/11. Midnight Cry, and the Sunday Law. So they're the seven major waymarks in our reform line. What angel comes here? 1989. First angel. Second angel would be where? Here, with Darius. Third angel would be here, with Artaxerxes. And you can see that's lining up with the three angels' messages of Millerite history and the three decrees of the Persian kings. So I've lined up Millerite history, gone back to the Persian kings, then gone forward to our history. So we'd have 1, 2, 3. Sunday Law, and here 9/11. Is everybody okay with that? This is one of the reasons why it's so important to understand, I'll put an A here, that the arrival of the second angel is indeed at 9/11, not at some other strange point. So I've lined up all of those histories. Where are we at the moment? We're somewhere here. Would we agree? How much time have I got left? 20 minutes. Okay. If we were to go to Matthew 25, which you don't need to turn there because we're all familiar with it, what's the theme of Matthew 25? Sorry? The theme. So I think someone said it. Wedding. Is everybody okay with that? The theme is the wedding. And at a wedding, what do you need? You need a bride and a groom. And in the story, what's connected with the bride and the bridegroom? 10 virgins. We'll call them guests. So let me ask you a question. All of us in this room, 1, 2 or 3, what are we? We're all guests? So I want us to think about the relationship between these two people. Are we the bride or are we the guest? What are we? So people want to say the bride, people want to say the guest, or people want to say both. Someone said New Jerusalem. And someone's going to say Ezekiel, the temple that's being portrayed there in the latter half of Ezekiel could also be considered in this story. So it says, the kingdom of heaven, this is a paraphrase of verse 1, then the kingdom of heaven was likened unto 10 virgins. Are the 10 virgins the bride or the guests? Okay, so here's the 10 virgins. But it says the kingdom of heaven. What is the kingdom of heaven? The church. Maybe we want to express it as the church. I want to suggest something. That the reason why not only this parable but other parables talk about the distinction between the guests and the bride is because the Lord wants us to understand some things, obviously. If we went to Revelation, the last part of Revelation, we'd see the city. What's the name of the city? New Jerusalem, because it's not the temple now, it's New Jerusalem. And it's got how many gates? 12 gates. And what are the gates for? For people to come in, just that simple. For people to come in. So who's going to come into Jerusalem? The bride or the guests? Sorry? The bride's going to come in?
She comes back with the bridegroom.
Okay, so this picture here of New Jerusalem, this one here, what is New Jerusalem? New Jerusalem is the bride, isn't it? New Jerusalem is the bride. So the people, those doors are not for the bride, are they? They're for the guests of the bride. Are we okay with that? I just want to see if I'm going to read something. Okay, no, I won't read that. So, New Jerusalem is a symbol of the bride, and the bride is what? Who's the bride of Christ? The church, so we could call it the church. And here are all these doors, or these gates for us to stream into. And so we're the guests. So are the guests the bride? No, the guests aren't the bride. And the guests at this level are not the church either, are they? No? And this is a symbol of New Jerusalem. So we've made all of those connections. So that's just another example to show you that the bride and the guests are not the same thing. They're being portrayed symbolically as two separate things. Yes? Are we okay with that? Now, this story here, from 1989 all the way through, the story of Cyrus, the rise of Artaxerxes, all the way through here, is a story about what? We'll go with the Persian kings. What is it a story of? The restoration of the temple. And the temple, or the house, is a symbol of what? The church. And are the Persians going to actually restore that temple? They're not. They're just going to give you the license to do that work. Who actually does the restorative work? God's people are doing that. Yes, we understand that? So the restoration of the house or the church is done by the people. So even in this little story, can we see that we have two things being portrayed? We have a temple or a building that's going to be constructed by people. Two separate things. Yep. So when we come into our history now, what is this the history of? Using this imagery here. The restoration of what? Of the temple, or what we might call the church, or what we might call, what kind of a church? The church triumphant. So that's what's being rebuilt or restored, or according to Acts chapter 15, Amos 9, it's the restoration of the house of, do we know? The house of David. This is the house of David that's being restored, because David is a symbol of Christ. It's the house of Christ that's being re-established. So the church triumphant is being rebuilt here, if we're okay with that. And who's rebuilding it? The people. Which people? Us. Yes? We're rebuilding that house, aren't we? So my sisters have said we're militant people who are doing that work. So what I want us to see, that in all of these stories there's this distinction made between the structure of the building, the bride, and the people who do that work. So I don't know how much time we're going to have to read, so I'll do a bit of reading and we'll see as far as we can get before we can try and make some conclusion. So this is from, it's all that series, the Review and Herald article series. This is April 25, 1907. It's number 4. From the time the foundation stone, this is paragraph 1. From the time the foundation stone of the second temple was laid, Satan brought to bear upon the builders many influences that greatly hindered the rapid prosecution of the work. The enemy did not have far to go in order to find men through whom to carry out his evil designs. Who does he use? The who? The Samaritans. The enemy did not have far to go to find men through whom to carry out his evil designs. Close by the Israelites, a few miles northward, dwelt the Samaritans. Who are the Samaritans? Who are the Samaritans? Sorry? Apostate Protestants. Who are they in the story? I mean, what's the history of Samaritans? Yep. So if we had Saul, David, Solomon, Rehoboam, Jeroboam, this is the 10 tribes, this is the 2 tribes. And these people end up settling in a place called Samaria, the northern part of the land of Israel, and these are the 2 tribes, Judah and Benjamin. Eventually these 10 tribes get taken by the king of the north, the Assyrians. They get dispersed and they intermingle with the heathen, and they began to have a strange religion, which is a combination of heathenism and Judaism. And these are the Samaritans here. So the Samaritans are relatives. I think it said that. It says, close by the Israelites, a few miles northward, dwelt the Samaritans. It doesn't quite say it in the passage, but if you do some research, they are the 10 tribes that have been identified in this story here. So, I'm going to have to give a bit of background of this. Cyrus has already done his work of decreeing the restoration of the building. Things have been going slow as you go down the road, and it's going to come to a place where Darius is going to issue a second decree. And when he issues his second decree, what's going to happen? The temple is going to be completed or finished. And it's going to be finished before Xerxes comes onto the scene. So I want us to see that. Again, if you go to the Prophecy School notes, or if you watch some of the presentations, I go through this history in a little bit more detail than I can go through now. Cyrus is going to lay the foundation stone for this work to be done. I'm not trying to lay this out, because I could lay this out in a different way to explain this slightly clearer, but I want to just keep this structure at the moment. Here at 9/11, what are we expecting to be done? We're expecting the temple to be finished or to be completed. Yep, want us to see that. And that work happens under the administration of Darius before Xerxes comes to the throne. So if Xerxes is a symbol of midnight here, so I've got midnight, I'm coming back to this scale, and Darius is 9/11, what I wanted us to pick up is somewhere in his reign here, so I'll just put a waymark here, the temple is finished. And what is this temple a symbol of? It's the church triumphant. So here's the church triumphant, and I want us to see, the first thing I want us to see is the church triumphant needs to be fully restored, fully built, completed before we get to midnight. So that's one thing I want us to see, and we can get that just straight out of this history. And who's going to be doing that work? It's the Jews that came out here under Cyrus's decree. Those first group of people that came out are going to be doing that work of restoring the building. And then we know that by the time you get to Artaxerxes, another group are going to come out, which is the story of Ezra chapter 7. We talk about that a lot nowadays, Ezra 7 verse 9, when they all come out. But this is history, is way before that. So here the temple is going to be finished, and it's going to be constructed by these people. But there are people who are going to stop them from doing that work. There's a hindrance that's going on. So here in this history here, there's people who are going to be hindering the work. And who are going to be hindering the work? The Samaritans. I'm going to skip down. There's so much we could read. In fact, we should really read the whole thing. But I'm just going to pick up this, paragraph 6. Had the Jewish leaders accepted this offer of help, because the Samaritans had offered the help now, they would have opened the door for the entrance of idolatry. They discerned the insincerity of the Samaritans. They realized that all the help that could be gained through an alliance with men would be as nothing in comparison with the prosperity that would accompany strict obedience to the plain commands of Jehovah. So here, the Samaritans want to offer help to God's people. They say, we'll help you build the temple. What did they say? No. What did they know? That if they had let the Samaritans join in, idolatry would have entered into the church. So what did they, she says here, they had the discernment to understand that everything was not quite right. If you go back to Christ's line, 9/11 is what? It's the baptism. Just before the baptism, John begins his ministry. And in Matthew 3 verse 7, the leaders of the church come to him and say, what? Can we please be baptized? Can we please be baptized? And what does John say to them? He says, I never told you to come to get baptized. Why are you even trying to join our movement? What do you want to try and do? Do you want to try and be part of our work? The work of what? The work of restoring the temple. And the leadership say, of course we want to be part of the work. We want to be part of your group. Did they? They did. They wanted to help because they knew that John the Baptist was a great man. He had a lot of influence with the people. And if they could be baptized into the movement, if they could join the movement, pretend to sort of half-heartedly work, they would have influence over the people. So John has the discernment to know that he's not going to let these people enter into the church triumphant or the construction of the church triumphant. He has the discernment to do that. Let's read this passage again. Had the Jewish leaders, who were the Jewish leaders in the time of Christ in the context that I've just given? Who? My brother, what did you say? It's John the Baptist. It's John the Baptist. Had the Jewish leaders, the people who were going to restore the temple in this history, had they connected with the Samaritans, it would have all gone wrong. Had John the Baptist accepted this offer of assistance from the church leadership, he would have opened the door for the entrance of idolatry. I'll switch over to what she says. They discerned the insincerity of the Samaritans. John discerned the insincerity of the church leaders. They realized that all the help that could be gained through an alliance with men would be as nothing in comparison with the prosperity that would accompany strict obedience to the plain command of Jehovah. So as we see this history here of the Persian kings, there's a hindrance that's going to be brought to view as the Samaritans want to do a work in assisting. But John had the wherewithal to say, we don't want you part of this. Did they have the wherewithal to say, we don't want the Samaritans to help? Yes? They did. 9/11. We mark 9/11 as being what? If we mark 1989 as being the bypassing of the leadership, what do we mark 9/11 as? The death of the leadership, don't we? The death of the leadership of this church. We say we don't want to have anything to do with dead people. Because what is Saul doing here? Before he just dies, he goes to the what? Which is idolatry. So we don't want anything to do with idolatry, do we? So we say, no, we'll build our own church, thank you very much. We don't need your help. But Satan has many ways to disrupt us. So in the time of Christ, if the leadership can't get in, Satan's going to get someone to come in through the back door. And who's that? Judas. And who lets him in? The disciples. Jesus didn't let him in. Jesus said, you're a devil, fight from the beginning. But the disciples let him in. And what was Judas doing continually? Hindering and undermining the work of God, wasn't he? Continually undermining the work of God. What did they have to do to Judas before the work could really move forward? They had to, my sister said they had to do that. They had to get rid of him. Yeah? He had to go and hang himself and be taken out of the movement before the work could progress. Now I'm combining many lines and squashing them and doing factors and all of this stuff because I've run out of time, but I want to make a simple point here. That the Samaritans are identified as two groups. One of them is the leadership of the church. Number one. They never got into the movement. We did a good job with that one. But we were foolish because at 9/11 we went to sleep. And we went to sleep. When we went to sleep, what happened? An enemy came in and sowed tares amongst us. And what have the tares been doing since they joined our movement? Hindering the work. So the tares and the leadership of our church, is it our church still? I don't know. Are all symbols of the Samaritans who hindered the construction. And this hindrance goes on and on and on. Now I've marked Darius here at 911, and they were still hindering. But two prophets are going to be raised up. Who are the two prophets? Haggai and Zechariah. Those two prophets are going to kick these workers into action and say, you need to get your lives in order and start doing a work. Which they do. And eventually the work gets finished here in the reign of Darius. And when Darius is going to do that work, what does it do with the Samaritans when he writes his decree? What does it do to the Samaritans? If you go back through the history, what the Samaritans are trying to do is always ply the Persian kings to do what they want, saying these people are bad people, hinder them. And it works until you get to Darius. And they try this policy and it backfires on them. And Darius says, Samaritans, what you need to do is actually assist and help them to do this work. So during the reign of Darius, the hindrance of the Samaritans actually melts and goes away. And when the Samaritans move out of the way, what happens to the temple? It gets built up in double quick time. Now this temple that they're building here, is it constructed perfectly? It has to be, because it's the temple of God. Does it have the same glory as the original temple? No. Well, they say it doesn't, but the prophecy says that it does. So this temple is a perfect temple. Is the church triumphant perfect? It is. But if you were to go through the stories of Haggai and Zechariah and go through this article, this series, and just read the books, maybe if we turn to Zechariah. I know we've run out of time. So Zechariah is doing his thing. He's prophesying to the people, telling them how bad they are and what they need to do, and they need to get all their life in order. So are they good people building the temple? Some are good and some are not so good. So they need to get their lives in order. Now, if we're wondering, is this the church triumphant? Is this the church triumphant, or is this not the church triumphant? What we see in this room. Yep? Is everybody good? No. Not everybody's good. Should we all be good? Of course we all should be good. Zechariah says you all should be good. But these people who are deficient, let me put it that way, let's say it mildly, are lacking in some, falling short of the glory. We'll use that, that's a nice phrase. The people who are doing the work, are they doing a glorious work? They certainly are, because from 9/11 onward, this is the glorious manifestation of the power of God. And what is the glorious manifestation of the power of God? That he can use people like us to do what? To create a perfect temple. Now, what God wants to do, he wants to fix the mismatch between the construction of a perfect church using people who are not perfect. And he's going to do that through a careful understanding or reading of the book of Daniel. Now if you go through the book of Daniel, we know it's a story of repeat and enlarge, don't we? Daniel 2, 7, 8 and 11. At least those four. They're all repeat and enlargements. 2, 7, 8, 11. Now if you were to go to each of those four prophecies, it will tell you something about the relationship between the kingdom of Satan and the kingdom of God. What the kingdom of Satan is doing and how God is going to respond. One of the simple ones that we probably all are familiar is, the theme of Daniel 7 is a theme of politics. But the theme of Daniel 8 is a theme of sanctuary or religion. So you can know that it's got two different themes. The same story but different themes. The theme of Daniel 11, we might say, is the theme of the message or tidings out of the east and out of the north. So Daniel 11 is the theme of a message or tidings. Daniel 8 is the theme of the the sanctuary, Daniel 7 is the theme of politics, and Daniel 2 is, we could call it an overarching theme, or the theme of the rise and fall of nations. So all I want us to see is that the book of Daniel gives these different themes, and all of them have to be considered. Now, in our movement, for a long time now, where have we been focusing on? 2, 7, 8 or 11? When we focus on 11, and what is 11, the theme? Tidings out of the east and out of the north. It's the message of Daniel 11, 40 to 45. But there's a lot more to the book of Daniel than that. The book of Daniel chapter 8 is the message of, or the theme of, sanctuary. What about the sanctuary? It's the restoration of the sanctuary. So, Daniel chapter 7 is the subject of politics, but also the subject or the theme of judgment. Who's going to be judged? Daniel chapter 7. Two groups of people, aren't they? Aren't those beasts going to be judged? Yeah? They're going to be judged and be destroyed. But who else is being judged? God's people. So when the judgment happens and the books are opened, what do you need to make sure before your name arises, according to Daniel chapter 8? You need to make sure that you've been restored, because if you haven't been restored, you're done for. So what I want us to see is that we have a very comprehensive message. If you consider Daniel 11, Daniel 8, and Daniel 7, that we need to understand that there's an issue of judgment. We need to understand that we need to be restored in the image of God, so that when our names are called up in that judgment, that we come out on the right side, and that we also have a message to give to the world, tidings out of the east and out of the north. And it may or may not have escaped your attention, but the subject of organisation has now become a subject of interest to this movement. And connected with the subject of organisation is the subject of the incarnation. And the subject of the incarnation is the subject of the restoration of the image of God in humanity, which is the whole purpose of a reform line in the first place, I would suggest. But because we've been so focused on tidings out of the east and out of the north, we have not kept our eye on the fact that there needs to be a corresponding work in what? In our own lives, in us. And what the story that I've just given here, very briefly, is that a perfect temple is going to be restored, the church triumphant, but it's going to be done through people who have defects in their characters. But the defects in their characters have to be addressed before we get to the close of probation here. And how do we do that? It has to be done through a comprehensive and holistic understanding of what our message teaches. So, just a heads up, I don't know how this is going to work on video, but because they don't know all the dates. I don't know what today's date is. Today is the 28th. So at the 28th, I wasn't at the School of Prophets. So today, one of the stroke student staff members took this morning's class. She's going to be taking next week's class, because I'm not there next week, and sometime before the end of the trimester she's going to take another 3 classes. She's going to do a 5-part series, that's what I wanted to say, a 5-part series on what I've just discussed about Daniel chapter 8, the comprehensive nature of our message or our movement. She's going to show how it's not just about the tidings of the east, it's not just about the issue of judgment, it's also about the restoration of the image of God in humanity. She's going to tie all these things together to show why our message has begun to change. So not only have you really have seen recently that we're now beginning to speak about organisation, but increasingly you're going to begin to see the subject of righteousness by faith, or the nature of man, or the nature of Christ, or how to fix the sin problem in a human being is going to be a subject of discussion. I'm not going to say how long it's going to last, I don't know, but it's going to become a subject of present truth in our movement. Because what we need to do is get these people who are building the church triumphant to get their lives in order. In Zechariah I think I directed this to Zechariah, didn't we? There's much we could say about all of this, but I just want to read Zechariah chapter 4, verse 1. And the angel talked with me again, and waked me as a man that is waked out of sleep, and said unto me, What seest thou? And I said, I have looked, and behold, a candlestick of all of gold, with a bowl on the top of it, and his 7 lamps. It goes on, and he said, verse 4. So I answered and spake to the angel that talked with me, saying, What are these, my Lord? Then the angel that talked with me answered and said, Knowest thou not what these be? And I said, No, my Lord. Then he answered and spake unto me, saying, all of this is what's going to happen. Talks about Zerubbabel, not by might, not by power, verse 6, by the Spirit, saith the Lord of hosts. So, this is Zechariah. And where is Zechariah? He's not here at 9/11. He's over here, just before the temple is going to be rebuilt. And he's waking up out of sleep. When did he go to sleep? Went to sleep at 9/11, didn't he? Or a little bit after. We normally mark it at 9/11. So he went to sleep, and now he's waking up out of the sleep. And when he wakes up, he's got no clue about what? About the temple. About all what that symbology means. And what's being portrayed here, if we were to carefully go through the book of Haggai, Zechariah, and we went through some of these passages from the Spirit of Prophecy, what you're going to see is that a group of people. Now, this person, Zechariah, did you think this is really Zechariah who's just got up out of sleep?
No.
That's not Zechariah. Who is that? That's us. Zechariah is, in a parable, symbolizing the people in that age. So these people who are clueless about what's going on, but they're required to build a perfect temple. So here, as we're building this temple, and as the work of the Samaritans has begun to cease, now God needs to address his relationship to these people, to Zechariah. As they wake up out of sleep, he says, do you even know what you're doing? And the answer is, no, my Lord, I don't understand anything. So we might understand how to put temples together, because we're builders, bricklayers, carpenters, etc. But we don't understand the spiritual nature of all that's gone on. So what I'm suggesting is this. Before midnight happens, each of us not only has to partake in the work of restoring this temple or rebuilding the temple, the church triumphant, what we also must do is get our lives in order. And if you've been wondering how on earth, since 9/11, you could still be part of this movement, which is a glorious manifestation of the power of God, which should be, what did we say before? Christ in you, the hope of glory. And most of us don't have Christ in us, do we? Because if we had Christ in us, what would we be doing? Living perfect lives. Not only would we not do sin, how does James say it? We could not do sin. James or John? Can't remember. I always forget the two. Not only would we not do sin, we could not do sin if his seed remained in us. If the seed was in us, we couldn't do sin. It's impossible to do sin, isn't it? If the seed of God is in us. But we know, as we walk along this road, up and down, I don't know everybody, I'm not even suggesting everybody's in this dysfunctional situation, because certainly there must be Enochs in the land. But for the most part, we're having dysfunctional lives. And what God wants us to do is make sure our personal experience begins to match with the glorious work that he's having us to do, which is the work of getting this temple finished. And the phrase that we're using here at the end of the world, we're not using the temple finished. The phrase that we're using is what? Organization. Before the church can be finished, which is another way of expressing the fact that organization needs to happen, before we become fully organized, we need to get to grips with our own individual lives. But to understand what's going on, we need to be able to compartmentalize two things. We need to separate the bride from the guests. Both of them need to be sorted out. I'm not arguing that, but both of them are happening concurrently. And we've spent a lot of time, if you go from 9/11, 16 years and counting, focusing on the bride. Now our focus is shifting from the bride to the guests. But at the same time, we're still focusing on the bride because the bride is now changed from this nebulous idea of the church triumphant to what? The subject of organisation. And what we're beginning to see, that the subject of the bride, the church triumphant, and the subject of the guests, the wise and the foolish virgins, are converging into a single theme under the umbrella title of organisation. Now, if you've wondered why this has taken so long to happen, have a guess. Because we've been hindered in our work. And who is hindering the work? And who are the Samaritans? They were the tares who we allowed into our movement. And from about 3 years ago, when the tares began to leave our movement, 3 years and counting, we begin to see that there's been an increase in light, a flood of light. As the hindrance leaves us, the work of restoration, both of organisation, which is the church triumphant, and our own understanding of our personal standing with respect to God, our relationship with him, Christ abiding in us, the hope of glory, is becoming clearer and clearer. It shouldn't come to it as any surprise to you that as of January 2017, where we were able to identify the Omega, who are now no longer really part of our movement, that hindrance has really been severed, even though there's still some mopping up work to be done. The subject of organisation begins to gain traction, and in connection with that, you begin to see a change in focus in our messages in 2017, which are dealing with organisation and the realisation that we need to really address the issue of sin in our lives. Not only experientially in our experiences, but also intellectually. So this is why you're beginning to see presentations and studies on how to deal with the issue of sin. I want to add one more point. For a long while now, we've been placing the subject of repentance at the wrong place. I think you've seen recent studies on this, but for a while now, in our movement, they were placing it at 9/11. We were placing repentance at 9/11, we were placing ignorance in the history from 1989 to 9/11, Acts 17:30, Acts 3:19. And all of that work now has been corrected, and the work of repentance has been put in its correct place, the work of ignorance has been put in its correct place, and those were the prelude to begin dealing with the subject of the putting away of sin in an individual's life, not in the life of the church triumphant or the bride, but in the life of the guests, because the bride had already got herself ready. When? Way back here at 9/11. The bride was already ready. The problem was with the guests, and we've been hindered in that work through the work of the Samaritans. So what I want us to see, in summary, despite all the studies that we've done before, is that when we begin to consider the work of the seven thunders as it relates to Millerite history, the history of the Persian kings, and into our own history, what the Lord has been trying to teach us, and is still teaching us, that between 9/11 and midnight, the church triumphant is going to be fully formed. And even though you look at your neighbours, this is the church triumphant, however bad and spotted you might look. But the church triumphant is a movement or a body. We know it's composed of individual members, but those individual members are at the other level, the guests, or the builders. And if you go through Haggai and Zechariah, you'll see that those builders were in a poor state of affairs. They become derelict in their duty. And I'm suggesting this, from 9/11 to now, each and every one of us have been derelict in our duty. And part of that dereliction of duty was through the influence of the Samaritans as they hindered us. As the tares are being taken out of our movement, as we speak, the work of restoration, not just of the church triumphant, but of us as individuals, is now beginning to be accomplished. Everything that's happened, that is happening, and that will happen, is being done according to God's order and in God's time. And if each of us just remain in the movement and remain faithful and begin to do a work of introspection and understanding, not only intellectually, but through an experience of how to overcome sin in our own lives, we can transition, if you like, from a guest to a bride, because that's what God's order is, isn't it? That's what he wants us to do. He wants those two people to be the same thing. And it's left to us to remedy the defects of our characters so that each of us can really be part of the church triumphant, because the church triumphant is almost built. The work of organisation, even though we may not see it, has already begun in earnest, and it will be accomplished in a short order. But each of us needs to come to a place of decision whether or not we're going to deal with the sin problem in our own lives and be part of that glorious triumphant church. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we want to thank you for your goodness and your watch care over us. We ask and pray that you would be with us, guide us and bless us. Lord, as we see the relationship of the worker and the building, of the guest and the bride, as we see, as surely we must see, that the church triumphant is almost fully completed, Lord, help us to realize our own place in this movement. Whether or not we're willing to become part of that church triumphant, or whether or not we too will be discarded and join the Omega movement. Help us, Lord, to remain vigilant, but not only remain vigilant, Lord, but to remain or even become interested in the work that you're doing here through your people at the end of the world. Lord, it's your will that we understand not only about the sanctuary, but also about the nature of man and the testimony of Jesus. Help us, Lord, to have a clearer conception of how each of us individually are to put sin out of our lives. When we understand this work intellectually, Lord, may each of us begin to do a work of putting these thoughts and ideas into practice so we might be part of this glorious holy church. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.